welcome to the Canarian International Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy and I am an alcoholic.
And my name is Mick, and we're sharing secretaryship with Mossy, and I am an alcoholic. Please join us for a few moments silence to remember what the still suffering alcoholic, both inside and outside this meeting.
Karen is going to read the preamble for us.
Good evening. I'm Karen. I'm an alcoholic. AA preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, domination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Warm welcome goes out to any newcomers or anyone returning to Alcoholics Anonymous.
The chat is now disabled until the end of the meeting, except for the meeting's host. If you feel the meeting security is at risk at any time during the meeting, please private message one of the co-hosts so they can check it out.
Thanks, Mick. And today our speaker is Rick, all the way from the east coast of America. And Rick was with us from the start of this meeting. But I'm delighted to be here with us today, Rick. I can't wait to hear your story. You celebrated 30 years or 32 years?
32 years.
32 years a few weeks ago. Well done, man. So you have 40 or 50 minutes, whatever it takes.
All right, great. Hi, I'm Rick. I'm an alcoholic.
All right.
The way that I do my pitch, I guess is what they call it out here, my speak is I tell my whole story so you understand where I started, what I went through, and how I got here. And that basically the overview is you can get through anything if you work these steps. I wish that everybody would work these steps. I was born in Moultrie, Georgia, to Milton and Mildred Thompson, both chronic alcoholics. Of course, I didn't know that until I was about 5. We had moved around a lot because my father was, I didn't know this obviously at the time, but he was a flight instructor for pilots for the CIA. And so I got these people how to fly the U-2 spy jets and that kind of thing. And we ended up going from Moultrie, Georgia to Columbia, South Carolina, basically wherever there was a naval base. And then we ended up right outside of Washington, D.C. and Springfield, Virginia. And which was about, I guess, about 7 or 8 miles away from Langley, where the CIA headquarters was. I always thought my father was an air safety investigator for the FAA. And he was under an immense amount of stress. The environment in which we lived in Northern Virginia during the early 60s was basically surrounded by the stress of the Cold War at its height. And I got there right after President Kennedy was elected. We arrived in Springfield. My first recollection of the alcoholism in my home is I could always feel a shift change in the vibration, for lack of a better term. I had an older brother. He was 10 years older than me, and he was in and out of the house a lot for obvious reasons, because he had seen them when they were very young and they were in the height of their alcoholism. There was an incredible amount of violence. And when I would see my father or mother reach underneath the kitchen sink and the brown bottle would come out, I knew things were going to get strange. And after, I don't know, about 7 or 8 months of that, and being a child, I could gauge where they were at. And I wasn't even sure what it was. I just knew that when that bottle came out, that everything got very, very strange. It was like walking on eggshells. And when someone would knock on the door, and my father was passed out downstairs, or my mother was passed out in the living room, I would have to go and answer the door when my brother wasn't there and make excuses for why they couldn't be seen. And no child should have to go through that. But I started learning how to compartmentalize my emotions and psychologically at that young age. The first time I saw my father hit my mother, I was standing in the kitchen with a friend of mine named Billy Boucher. These are things you don't forget when you're a child. And he walked in and just slapped her across the face, and I immediately went into shock. And the next day when we were at Billy's house, Billy asked his mother in front of me, she was just a child, why does Ricky's father slap his mother? And she said, he was a joker. But when she said that, she looked at me with pity. I guess, that's the only emotion I could put with it. And so then at that moment, and I guess I was, I think I was like 6 or 7 then, I had to immediately learn how to cover everybody because I felt that was my responsibility. And I had to be hyper vigilant about the environment and what people would say and how to answer those people without having to have any discussion pertaining to the alcoholism with my parents, because you didn't do that back then. My brother was drifting away from us as fast as he could because he was damaged by it. And I didn't realize how much until later. The violence kept escalating. We would move from one place to another in Springfield. And then we ended up in a very nice apartment complex where a lot of government people lived. And my father, when we first moved there, he became acclimated with a fellow by the name of Frank Lonergan. Frank Lonergan, to me, was just the man who managed the local movie theater. He used to give us all tickets, and came to find out that he was the man that was in the Army Corps of Engineers who worked directly for General MacArthur to rebuild Japan. It was that strange of an environment where every night they would get together and they would have cocktail parties at somebody's house. That's how you got rid of the stress. You smoked cigarettes and you had cocktail parties, and whatever happened after that happens. Unfortunately, when those cocktail parties would happen, I would know what was coming. There would be violence. My mother would push my father's buttons and he beat the shit out of her. And this went on at least 3 to 4 times a week. And so, that's more in situations that I had to create excuses for. And, why has your mother got a cast on her arm? Well, she fell down the stairs, that kind of thing. And so that affected me in school. It affected me with my friendships because I couldn't have real friends because I had to keep them at an arm's length. Unless the parents knew my parents, they were all drinking, and that was just the unwritten rule of what happened during these episodes of alcoholism and drinking. I didn't tell anybody anything. And so I had to be very careful about what I said, who I said it to. In 1971, my father was getting a little ahead of myself. He was having issues with his heart because of the drinking and the smoking and the stress of working for the government and what he knew. And there would be times he would leave for 3 weeks and we couldn't get a hold of him directly. We'd have to call a call center, and then he would call back, and it would be very crackly and very faint. And anybody that's old enough to remember, that's what an international call used to sound like. And so when he would come back, he would be an emotional zombie. God only knows what he was doing. He was offshore, and probably whatever it was quite bloody, because we were doing a lot of bloody things back then to other governments and to take over governments or whatever they were doing, which added to the drinking, which added to the stress. And so they forced him into retirement at the age of 48 because he couldn't do it anymore. And that sent everything going down the toilet. And we moved from Fairfax County, Virginia, which at the time had the best school system in America. And we ended up going to his hometown, which was the asshole of the earth. And it was a place called Dunn, North Carolina, which was about 30 miles out of Raleigh, North Carolina, where my grandparents and my father's parents lived. And I was the only kid in school that had a pair of Levi's and a pair of Converse tennis shoes. And I was the only redheaded kid in the entire city. That's not good when you're surrounded by basically hillbillies. And that's basically what was going on there. So I was fighting every day So, I've got the war going on at home with mom and dad, and I got this thing going on at school every day. And during this time, what happened is, getting back to my brother. My brother was a follower. He wasn't a leader. He was crushed, and so he got involved in the anti-war movement in DC before we had moved, and my father had to retire. And he was following Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, who were the head of this movement. And so he got involved with the drugs, and he ended up getting busted after my father got him admitted to Annapolis. And so he split. And so, that him being gone and basically fueled the fighting between my parents, because then it became a blame game. And so it was just like going from one topic to another of why they had to fight and, get involved in all that violence. We moved down there, and the drinking escalated. And my father had invested with a friend of his an outdoor skating rink, and I would work there during the day. And I came home one night, and my mother wasn't there, and I looked at my father and said, "Where's mom?" And he said, "She fell." And I knew exactly what that meant. And he said, "She's in the hospital." And what he didn't realize is that I was in my bedroom, and I came home early, and he hit her upside the left side of her head with a glass ashtray. And they came. I was very quiet because I thought he killed her, and I thought if I'd made a sound, he would do the same thing to me. So he lied right to my face, didn't even blink. The next day, we went to the hospital to see my mother, and she was in a hospital room with a nurse, and she had had a psychic change, obviously. And she wasn't the same person. She wasn't completely out of her scope of reality, but it was like she was almost childlike in a way. And the surgeon came in, and he said that she had a blood clot on her brain, and they had to go in and remove it. And he fell apart because he saw what he did to his bride. And 3 days later, the operation transpired. And I had called my mother's mother, my grandmother, and told her what happened. And her not being the sharpest knife in the drawer told my father, and if he basically beat the hell out of me. And if my grandmother, his mother, wouldn't have been there, he would have killed me on the spot. And so we walked in the hospital room, and my mother's there. Her head's completely shaven, and she has a horseshoe scar going all the way around the other side of her head, where they had to take the bone out and go into her brain and alleviate the bleeding and handle the clot. And she was not the same. And from that moment on, I guess my father spent the next 35 days drinking every single day. And I didn't have, or no one had an idea how severe it was until after he had died. And he went into DT, cirrhosis of the liver. This guy's 48 years old. He's a kid. And he went through all of the nightmares that alcoholics go through when they're trying to kill themselves or medicate the pain. And we found 58 empty pint bottles underneath the bed. So he would sit there and drink and just toss it underneath the bed. So he was gone. My brother is in Canada hiding out from the feds because he refused to go to Vietnam. And so my mother and I are taken in by my aunt, her sister, and we were moved to northern Kentucky. And I'm just a little boy, I'm just, in shock. And I didn't even realize I was in shock. And what was transpiring from the moment that my aunt got involved, who was one of those devout Catholics that ran in and out of church like her ass was on fire, she was stealing my father's retirement money from my mother. And hang on a second, to contact me. Okay, we're good. So what was going on there is she wanted to get me out of the picture so she could completely control my mother. And so they sent me to Canada to see my brother. Now, my brother was living in a commune. And so I went up there with my mother, and he hadn't seen my mother in a few years. And he was in complete denial because my brother was a sociopath and a complete narcissist. Now, of course, I'm, a 13-year-old boy. I wouldn't have no idea this. And he was my brother, and I loved him, and I trusted him with my life. Now there I am. I've never taken a drug. I've never taken a drink or smoked a cigarette every once in a while, but that was about it. And we're sitting around a campfire one night, and him and his wife and myself, and he pulls out a joint and he goes, "Smoke this." And I did immediately, because I was thinking, why will my brother ever hurt me? And there he was, a 24-year-old man, and full of all of his faculties, morally knew what he was doing. And at that moment, two things happened. I took 2 hits off that joint, and within about, I don't know, a minute, everything went click, click, click. Everything got level, and everything went away. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the sorrow was gone. And I said, this is great, when I'm a 13-year-old child. At the same time, by doing that to me, which was child abuse, my brother basically rat screwed any shot that I had in life, truthfully. And so I was there for about a month or so with my mother. And then while we were there, he was trying to get custody of my mother so they could get the money. And a bunch of pirates, basically, is what my family were. And so we got out of there and we came back, and my aunt took one look at me and knew what she had done. She had basically sent me into the lion's den. And so from that point on, she decided that I should go to military school. I just turned on the grass. I'm listening to Led Zeppelin. I mean, my head's over here, and they've got me over here. And the place that they put me in was in Kentucky, and it was called Millersburg Military Institute. And that was the dumping ground for kids that nobody wanted, that had money or means. And they used my father's insurance money that he left me to pay for this thing. And so I went in there, and it was a nightmare. We had a guy there that was the platoon leader. We were in the band company. I was a drummer. And so, but I knew this guy was not straight in his head. I knew he was crazy, because when you're raised by wolves and crazy people, you immediately spot somebody that's broken. And this guy was dangerous. And I went in there at 13 years of age trying to convince the colonel of the school that this guy was a complete whack job. And he didn't believe me for all the obvious reasons. One night before I leave, this guy takes his saber, which is a sword, because he was an officer, and busts out all the windows in his room and starts carving up his furniture. And these 2 stupid children across the hall say, well, you can stay with us this night, because we're all leaving tomorrow. And so I walk in my room, and this is where my instinct for survival started kicking in. I literally closed the door, locked it, and moved the chest of drawers across the room, put it against the door, because I knew something was going to go wrong. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear a knock on my door. I don't answer it, because I've got a baseball bat next to me. And survival mode kicked in. And then about, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes later, or maybe later than that, there was a scratching on the door. I didn't answer that. And then about less than 10 minutes later, screaming, lights on, people knocking on people's doors. And then I open my door, and I look in front down, and there's a pool of blood. I look across the room, and the colonel, who I told this guy was nuts, is standing there looking at me, and on the top bunk is covered in blood. And what this lunatic did is he got a claw hammer and beat the shit out of this kid and almost killed him. And so I went home and told my aunt and my uncle what happened, and they sent me back there. And anybody would have just sued the school, and I would have been, my education would have been set, but they sent me back there because the disconnect emotionally that I had with these people was biblical. So I got out, came back. My aunt immediately sends me back to Canada to stay with my brother. And I go back there, and then the drug usage heightened. He didn't do it directly because he didn't have the guts. He had someone give me a hit of 4-way LSD, and it was pure. And I was out in a place called Seashell, British Columbia, that was all mountains. We were up an inlet 15 miles, so it was very natural. And that's probably the reason I didn't go nuts. And it was actually a very good experience. Not a good experience for a 14, 15-year-old kid, but that's the way it played out. So I came back, and she put me in an orphanage called Boys Haven. And so a friend of mine that used to be in military school, his brother was the biggest pot dealer in Louisville. So that was, convenient for me, because everything I tried to do from that time as I tried to stay completely out of reality and just have enough pot in me to where I was medicated so I wouldn't have to feel anything. I wouldn't have to think about anything. And I could compartmentalize everything psychologically and emotionally. And so one night I decided I was going over to my friend's house, and I saw a car with some keys hanging out of it. And I was like anybody that's seen the Pink Panther, I was the Inspector Clouseau of criminals. I was horrible at it. And so I stole this car, and it had a 3-speed in it, and I didn't know how to drive this 3-speed. So I ended up taking the ass end off a brand new Corvette, hitting a Cadillac, and parking the car in the middle of a restaurant. Thank God nobody was there. They caught me. They put me in a place called Lake Cumberland State Boys Camp, where I learned how to cross cut and trees and make racks, wood ricks and things like that. And I was there for 8 months, and it was group therapy. And basically they would put you in the middle of 12 guys. And if they didn't like what you were saying, they would all grab a piece of you and shake you and scream, why, until you fell apart. It was, Gestalt therapy. And so I, learned quickly how to adapt, how to give them the answers they wanted, so I wouldn't have to deal with my emotions, because I had no filter then. So I had to learn how to manipulate that situation. So I was there for 8 months. I got out, and then I lived with my mother and my grandmother when I got out of there. And I was watching my mother perish right in front of me. She was smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day. The woman wanted to die, and I couldn't watch it. And I knew if I stayed there, I wasn't going to be able to learn anything about life. I had to go out and find it, which was not probably the most logical move I could have made. But I was at that point 16 years old, and lost, broken, and shattered, and having everything held together emotionally and psychologically by baling wire through the weed and beer. And so I go out there, and I end up in one of these youth hostels. And while I was there, I was getting a high school diploma. And so one day I was on my way across the University of Cincinnati soccer field, and I saw 2 guys leaning against a wall smoking a joint. So what do? I go over there and try to bum a joint from them. And they wouldn't give it to me, but they got me high. And I said, what are you guys doing here? And this is going to date me, but they said, we're setting up a Robin Trower concert. Now, in 1975, Robin Trower was this huge, huge act. And I looked at them and I said, I'll work for free. And that's magic to guys like that, because they don't have to pay you anything. So there I am at the same size I am now at 16. So they take me in there and they teach me how to unload a semi, how to put the road cases on the stage, how to set up. And so I found something I immediately liked. And so I was living in this, after that first show, I was living in this youth hostel, and there was a secondary school on the second floor. And there was this incredibly beautiful young woman that was going there. I mean, I just fell in love with her. And so we got together, and she had talked her very wealthy parents into letting me move in the big house. So I move in there, and, you take a look at this situation. Parents know that we're very young, and they know that we're screwing. I mean, that's what we do when we're young. And so they moved me in the room right next to her to keep her calm, because she was a little, she starts seeing other guys. I get jealous. I get pissed. It goes right down the drain. They throw me out. And that gutted me, because I had then lost 2 families within 3 years, and had been through that situation with my brother, and been through the juvenile detention center for 8 months. And so I emotionally and psychologically started diving into drugs, and a lot of drinking, and a lot of pot, and just to try and maintain some level of sanity, which basically was non-existent. I then got close to the promoter of that one show, and he's still my friend today, 50 years later. And he was involved with Aerosmith, AC/DC, Ted Nugent, the Scorpions, Led Zeppelin. He was doing shows and rock festivals everywhere. And they basically made me the gopher. And they liked me because I didn't get loaded when I was working, and I was there to learn. And I would do my job and stand in the corner and literally watch everybody else. And so I was very lucky to have gotten in the music business on that level, where most people, they don't even get in the arena. So I was kind of blessed that way. So I tried to learn as much as I could. But there's a broken kid, and just I was hanging on to anything I could to keep from looking at the reality of the nightmare of the heartache that I had experienced and the psychological damage. I had no idea how sick I was. I had no idea how broken I was. Kids don't. And so I started getting involved with guys that were financing these shows, and all of them were drug dealers. They were washing their money. And so I was at somebody's house in 1977, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then the door gets kicked in, the DEA walks in, and they go downstairs and they find a whole lot of pot and a whole lot of blow. And I hadn't done cocaine then, but we all went in the same van. And I'm sitting there, and when the FBI figured out I really didn't know what was going on, they charged me as a youth offender. And then I had a probation officer who was a guy that he was one of these builders. He was a weightlifter. He was an ex-Marine, and he was a private in the Marines. And he used to get his short sleeve shirts, and he would roll them up so you could see his muscles, try to be as intimidating as possible. And here I am, like a little hippie kid. All I want to do is work shows, smoke my little grass, and everybody leave me the hell alone. Where he decided that wasn't in my best interest, so he would send me to a place called Job Corps, where I would learn how to do sheet metal. And then he would, put me in a halfway house. And I was completely rebellious because all I was trying to do was better my life the only way I knew how. So this guy would violate my probation, and put me in jail. And so this went on and on and on. And this went on for 6 years. And it was extremely abusive. And I would be in a dressing room with Aerosmith one night, trying to get on a full-time tour. And the next day I would be arrested by U.S. Marshals and put in jail. And so, it was like that. When I got done with that, I was extremely broken. I lost my mother and my grandmother within 5 months of each other in 1983. I got a little money, went through it because no one ever taught me about money. And I probably was so close to death from drinking because I was literally obliterated every day. And it just kept escalating and escalating and escalating. And so I got through that, and I had met this young girl, and I'd fallen in love with her. We had moved in with each other. I was working shows. And at that time I was doing that, one of these investors got a hold of me and says, I know a way that you can make some money. He says, I'm bringing cars over from Europe, and they called it the gray market. And that's when the Deutschmark was 4-1 to the dollar. So I got a little money from this guy and went over and started bringing used Mercedes, used Rolls Royces on my own. And I had an attorney that was very wealthy, and he was an egomaniac, still my friend today. And there was an old Packard dealership across from his mansion where he ran his office from. And I figured it out. And I started figuring out. So I was going back and forth to Germany like every week, getting these cars brought back, and I made a lot of money. And I didn't report any of it because I had that criminal element in me, and I didn't really like the government that much. But the drugs and everything eventually destroyed that and destroyed the relationship with this girl. So I'm living in Cincinnati, Ohio. She moves to Akron, Ohio to get away from me. I'm thinking, I gotta marry this girl. So I follow her up there, and she eventually, I started working for this theater up there, and making a little money, staying alive. So she vamooses, and she gets a job, and she goes to Rochester, New York, to get as far away from me as possible. And then I'm bottoming out, and I'm living in a really horrible little 1-bedroom apartment in Akron on Main Street. Every night I'm walking to the bar, and one night I'm at a Taco Bell at midnight, and I walk in and I see this woman. She looks angelic, and of course I hit on her. And so she's a very professional, very nice looking woman. And I'm driving a 1977 Plymouth Belvedere that's baby shit yellow, and it's rusted through from bumper to bumper on each side. So I'm looking like a total winner. This is the kind of girl the guy wants to go out with. And so I said, I would love to take you out. She says, I'd love to go out with you. Give me your phone number. So the next day she calls me up, and she goes, I'm going to meet you at the Alano Club. And the Alano Club, which I didn't know what an Alano Club was halfway between my house and the bar. So I walk in there, and I look around, and there's guys smoking cigarettes. There's slogans all over the wall. There's no booze, and everybody's smoking cigarettes and playing pool. And all of a sudden I feel this hand on my shoulder, and I turn around, there's this guy with his Cheshire cat grin. And he says, we're going to go meet Gail. Within 25 minutes, this guy had me in the basement of a church at a men's stag reading How It Works. Within 4 days, they had me in the Interval Brotherhood home in Akron, and I was there for 3 months. And that's when the real seeds were planted. I wasn't listening. I was hustling because I had to have the concert business I thought was going to fix all of this. And so when I was in there, I had a little credit card to make phone calls with, and I booked my first concert out of the treatment center. And there was a guy there. I'll never forget this man named John Leach, a Scotsman. And he looked right through me and he goes, look, we know you're trying to make money and you're trying to get your shit together. He said, just try and listen to something here so you don't go out there and kill yourself if you make money. And so there were seeds planted. I didn't work the steps. The first year after I got out, I moved in with this kid that was there who had some money. So I'm living upstairs and I'm advancing the show, and it sells out, and I'm working on the second one because now I've got to focus on that. I don't have to focus on me. That's the filter. So I've got the pot, I've got the business, and things are going right. But the first night that I had a success, I had my first show was a sellout, and I'm standing there and I'm getting everything I dreamed of. I relapsed because I had no infrastructure. I wasn't working any steps. I was a sick, broken, young alcoholic and drug addict. So I'm just, running. And so I do another show in Louisville, and I meet this girl who's from Lincolnshire who lives there, and she's married. And the guy that's there is handling her like my father used to handle my mother. So, Captain Stablewoman, with my codependency issues, I rescue her. Not a very brilliant move on my part, but at the time, it was just another way to not feel. And so we got together, and she was looking for a way out because she was looking to get, her citizenship, and I was her ticket. And so we got together, and she was a very lovely woman. And so we got married, and then, we moved to Tampa to see my brother. I hadn't seen my brother in 16 years, and he was trying to talk me out of his kidney and giving me 30 pounds of pot. This was my experience with my brother. So that did not happen. Thank God I wasn't a match. And so everything fell apart there. And we moved from there to Atlanta. And that's when everything fell apart. And so her parents come over. I've never met them, talked to them on the phone. We're standing in the airport. The mother comes out. She's an extremely beautiful woman, very daft. It was an act. The father comes out. He was 60 years old, looked like he was 80. And he walks up to me and shakes my hand and collapses and hits his knees, and his eyes go back. And the wife says, "Oh my God, he's dead." He was a type A diabetic. Now, I didn't understand what that meant. And so the EMTs come, they gave him some candy, some milk. They took him to the hospital. He survived. She hadn't given him his insulin in 24 hours. Now, I didn't put these things together because I'm still stoned and I'm out of my mind. So we move into this house, and his psychological and emotional range was bang, 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 because she was watering down his insulin, and she had changed his insulin from animal to synthetic. And so one day he steps on a carpet tack. Now, when a diabetic does that, you have to immediately have them given IV antibiotics, because if not, the poison will get into their bloodstream and drown their heart. And that's what happened. And this woman knew what she was doing. And so it was like right before Christmas Eve, and he was getting very violent, very intense. And I called my cousin, who's a very large lawyer out here, and I explained everything to him. He goes, "Get out, because they're killing him." He says, "You got to just get out." And I got my mother's ring from my wife, and I left, and I moved to Dallas. And they moved to Louisville, and he was dead within 60 days. And he had a lot of money. He had a granary and Alford Links. And so that's what they did. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just shredded. And one day I sat there, and I smoked a half a bag of Thai stick, and I drank about 3/4 of a bottle of Stoli, and I was stone cold sober. And I stood in my friend's bathroom. It could have been for an hour, I don't know. And I just looked at myself, and it all just came up. And I was disgusted with me. I was disgusted with my life. I was disgusted that I had turned into my father to a certain degree, although the violence wasn't there. And I looked in the mirror and I said to myself, it ain't them, motherfucker. And I walked in the next room. I opened up a Yellow Pages. I just looked at the first number that said Alcoholics Anonymous, and I called the number. And this little hillbilly guy named Randy answered the phone, and I said, I'm ready. That's all I said. I mean, there was nothing else I had left. And he said, do not move from where you are. And so they came over and they got me. And that was on February the 20th, 1993. And I've been sober ever since. I got sober that night because I had nowhere else to go. I got sober that night because I knew that room, I was safe. And I was just scared enough to actually work the steps. And when I walked in to my sponsor's house, I did my 4th and 5th step. I literally, physically and spiritually and psychically projectile vomited my soul on this man because I didn't want it anymore. And before I did it, he said, if you do this, you'll never take another drink or smoke another joint or do another drug again. I promise you. And he was right. And I did it. And what I have learned from this is that I got to learn who I was. I got to learn who I wasn't. I got to learn how to love myself. And the key to this entire thing for me was the 4th and 5th step are the most important steps, in my opinion, outside of looking yourself in the face and taking that first step and realizing that you can't run your life and that you have to bring God into it. And that's what I call my higher power. And the night that I walked in there and took that chip, I turned everything over to him. I walked in the door to the Addison Group in Dallas, Texas. And I looked up and I said, God, take my drugs and my alcoholism. I can't do this anymore. And I never looked back. Now, the rest of my life was a complete train wreck because when you quit drinking, and you quit smoking dope, well, there's women, and there's cigarettes. And so I went down that pathway until I couldn't do that anymore. And it's been a succession of lessons being learned and mistakes being made and having to grow up and be adult enough to take responsibility for them. And this program saved my life. This program helped me find out who I am and who I'm not, that I'm not my father, that I'm not my brother. And I stayed in Dallas for 10 years. And I said to myself, if I can stay sober for 10 years, I can move to LA and probably not die. That was the deal I made with myself. So I moved out here in 2003, and I've been out here for 22 years now. And I'm very active in the program. And I sponsor one guy because it's very hard to find young guys that really want to stay sober out here because it's just it's the jungle out here. I got back in touch with my brother a couple of times. I saw my brother every 16 years, literally. And every time I got near him, he'd cut me. He just knifed me because that's what he does to everybody. And so I hadn't seen him in a while, and his alcoholism was prevalent throughout his life, his drug addiction throughout his life. And he had a bunch of kids, and they were train wrecks. So I had talked to him about a year ago, and he was living back in Hawaii, and he was living in a tent in a community in Kauai, which sounds elegant, but not really. And they were squatting on this man's land. They were all living in tents, a bunch of guys in their 70s from the 60s era, all ruined. And he, last time I spoke to him, he said, I'm moving to Florida to be close to my kids because I've turned into a hobo. And I just went silent. I didn't even know how to respond to that. So he moves back, and he comes off the plane, and he hadn't bathed. He looked like somebody off the street, and his children were completely blown away. So they tried to clean him up. They got him a nice trailer to live in. And I knew that after I had talked to my nephew the last time, that the next phone call I was going to receive was going to be that my brother was gone. And on the 16th of October at 9:10 p.m., that call came in. And I hadn't seen my brother in 16 years. But I had to suit up. I had to show up. I did it for them. I did it for the kids. I didn't do it for him. I did it for somebody else. I did it to give those kids some focal point of realism, of there's another type of a life that they could have, and to know that there is somebody in the family that is no longer a complete train wreck. So I went there, and I'm standing and I'm looking at my brother in this corrugated box that they're going to put him in the oven in. And I fell apart, but I only fell apart for 3 minutes. And then the walls came up again, because that's my safety valve. And I saw a man that could have been anything, that had the opportunities that I never have. And he threw it all away because he never got the program. He never understood that there was a way out. He just kept running and running and running. And so I'm standing there in my suit, and I'm clean, and I'm trying to be an example as discreetly as I could, and flow as much love to these kids as possible, even though we didn't really have a true relationship. And I don't know if I made an effect on them or not, but I'm standing there and I'm realizing I'm next, because my family's gone. And that was interesting to deal with. And but I didn't drink over it. I didn't use over it. I called my sponsor, and I did the right thing. And I called my sponsee and talked to him. So I'm on the plane flight back to LA from St. Augustine, Florida. And I haven't heard from this girl that I've known since she was 15, and I've known her since 1980. And I knew she had some problems, and she came from a prominent family. She had married somebody else, but we remained friends. And I would flow as much to her because she had been in and out of the program. And I hadn't heard from her. And I checked her Facebook page. And then I said, this is really bizarre. So I looked on her husband's page, and I went a few months back and found out that she had died. And she had been arrested for meth. And so there I am, and going 500 miles an hour in a tube, coming back here, having now to grieve 2 deaths from this disease. And anybody that's listening to me that knows they're an alcoholic and a drug addict, the only way that you can go, the only solace you're going to find, and the only relief you're ever going to have is this program. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous has changed me into the man I'm supposed to be. I'm not perfect. I've got flaws like everybody else. I'm not a big book thumper. I do what's in front of me, and if I can help another alcoholic, I'm right there. But it's been an incredible run of my life, and some of my parts of my life, I look over my shoulder, and I cannot even believe I survived it. And the reason that I did survive it, I believe, is because God's always had my back my whole life. And I also believe that my father has been present in my life and has been watching over me, because there are times without any question I should have been murdered with the situation I put myself in, because I ran with wolves. And these people were so dangerous. I had no concept of how dangerous these people really were. And if I can do this thing, anybody can do it. But you've got to be committed. You've got to be 100,000% committed to becoming the person that God wants you to be. And you have to come in for yourself. You cannot come in here to get her back, him back, them back, the job back, or any of that horse shit, because it will not work. I've watched many, many people go out and die because they didn't get the simplicity of this thing. It's either you're in the rooms and you're doing this thing and you stay alive, or you play around with it and you end up dead. I've been to over 75 funerals. Out here, they don't have funerals, they have memorials. It's a bunch of bullshit. But in Texas, they have funerals. And this one guy in particular, I'll never forget this guy. He looked like Clark Kent. This guy looked as straight as possible. He was an engineer, owned a home, was making a couple $100,000 a year, had like 3 years of sobriety. You would think this guy had it all going on. And so one day we're sitting there after a noon meeting, and he goes, I got to go home. I'll see you guys at the 6, because we were going to 3 meetings a day. He goes home, goes into his garage, hangs himself. And we found out, we all went into shock. And I said to myself, I said, he left something out on his 5th step, because the secrets are what is going to assassinate your soul. And he had written his sponsor a letter, and he had been sexually abused when he was a kid. And he didn't tell anybody because he had such shame from it. And so if you're new and you're doing your 5th step, don't hold anything back, because the one thing that you're ashamed of will put you in a casket, 100% guaranteed. And with that, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me today. And I hope I was of some benefit to some of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. I got a lot from your story, especially the end of it. I grew up in a dysfunctional family, to say the least. And, there's a lot of similarities, even though we're different stories. And, so many people have come and gone that there was no need for them to leave. This program is so simple, it bypasses people. And this time of the year, I spend reflecting, because I'm coming up on an anniversary again myself. And I just think of all the people that I've spent time with, and we've had a few laughs, and they picked up again, or they used again. And most of them have passed since. That's what's running through my mind now, I mean, I came in, there was 3 things I was never going to share with anyone, and I knew that for a fact. They were never going to come out. And I got a sponsee when I was 6 months sober. I got my first sponsee. He was 12 months sober. And he said to me, there's one thing, he said, I'm taking to the grave with me. And I said, that's fine. You can take that to the grave, because I'm taking 3 things. And a few months later, he called me up to his house and he shared that with me. The last thing that he kept, he was keeping a secret. And it turned the tables on me. And I had to get rid of my own stuff. And it freed me. I have to say, Rick, I absolutely love being sober. I love what's on offer here. I love the life that's out there. The things I've done since I got sober have just been amazing. It amazes me. And I do wake up some days and I look around me and I think, how in the name of Jesus have you pulled this off? And all it is getting to my meetings, staying in contact with a higher power that I don't understand. The program it was bet into me from the big book, and doing a bit of service. And the complete package has me sitting here today with a smile on my face, So I wish everybody well. And at that, we'll hand it over to Mick Ferret, my old friend.
Right. Thanks, Mossy. Rick, fantastic. 2 or 3 things. I grew up in a house full of secrets. We weren't allowed to let anybody know what was going on in the house. And it wasn't through drink, it was through jealousy. My dad was a very jealous man, and we were a dysfunctional family. But we had to pretend, and you would, when you said you took your first joint and how it eased everything out of your mind. Mine was the drink. I took my first drink and I thought, Christ, if this is magic. And but after a while it wasn't. After a while. And you spoke about, if you can do it, anybody can. And the group I used to be in used to say that in the group. If Mick can do it, anybody can. Because I fought this program, fought it hard. but I'm glad it won because my life today, I have such a wonderful life through the people of Alcoholics Anonymous and believing in something. You know, mine's the great outdoors, but that's all right. That's my higher power. But I've still got an open mind on it because I live only 250 yards from a church, and every time I walk past it, I look at the God up there. You know, right. We're coming to
Right.
the end of the meeting, so
Yeah.
Kate's going to do the promises.
Okay, the promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the line no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experiences can benefit others. This feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled amongst us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, and they will always materialize if we work with them, for them.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kate. And thank you, Karen, for doing the reading at the start. Thanks, Mick, for doing my sidekick. Kathleen for timekeeper. Everyone else for being here. And not forgetting you, Rick. Thanks for a fantastic share and thanks for helping us stay sober today. That's that done. Okay, over to you, Mick.
Yeah. A reminder: we have a meeting on 7 days a week. It's at 8:30 every morning UK time. We also have a lunchtime meeting every Sunday at 1 p.m. UK time. This is a meditation meeting. Over back to you, Mossy.
And on Saturdays, of course, we have our old timers meeting, an extended share recorded for our archives. And on Thursday evenings, we have a meeting at 7:30 p.m. UK time. We use the same meeting code for all our meetings.
Stick around for fellowship after the meeting. If you want a breakout room after the meeting, please ask the host.
And the yellow card, who you see here?
What you hear here,
When you leave here.
let it stay here.
And at that, Rick, we'll get you to lead us out with the Serenity Prayer. And again, thanks so much for you helping us stay sober today. And there you go. Up to you, Rick.
Okay, I'd like to say one thing before I get into the Serenity Prayer. For anybody that's new, you have to realize that alcoholism is a spiritual disease, in my humble opinion. And I've watched it eat from the spine out. Beautiful people, destroy families. And so if you're running around and you're beating yourself up, you're beating up on the wrong person. Try to love yourself a little bit more today than you did last night or yesterday. God,
Grant
And with the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Rick.